This is the Proton S70, which by now I'm sure most of you would have heard of. Launched in November last year, it has since gone on to create quite a stir with the whole C-segment car for B-segment money argument. And I'm sure everyone loves a car that's great value for money. I mean, think about it. You have a car that, in range-topping Flagship X spec right here, costs just 94,800 ringgit, compared to the Vios G, which goes for 95,500 ringgit, and the most expensive petrol-only City goes for 99,900 ringgit. And then, you have the C-segment hotshots, which include the Civic, and that starts from 131,900 ringgit, while the Corolla Altis begins from 139,800 ringgit. So if this is a C-segment car, then why does the Proton S70 sit on the same platform as the Proton X50 and the Geely M Grand, which are both B-segment cars? Now I say M Grand and not Binyue because while it sits on the same platform, it's a wildly different variant altogether. Adrian has taken a closer look at that car, so check out his video for more on that distinction. In any case, this is the S70, and going by Proton's naming convention means that it sits at the same level as the X70 SUV, which is a C-segment car. So that's that. So I'll spare you all the headache because segments today are beginning to blur with C-segment cars reaching the size and price tags of D-segment cars from the past. So let's do away with that and focus on what the S70 has to offer against its rivals in the same price bracket. So, if you are looking for a sedan below the 100,000 ringgit mark, is this your next perfect car? Let's find out. Looks-wise, I really like how the S70 is designed. Overall impressions, it's a very refined car. In fact, way more refined than the Vios in my opinion, which can look a bit too try-hard from some angles. And against the City, while that's not an ugly car, this looks a bit more premium. It has an air of sophistication, so to speak. And I remember looking at photos of the Geely M Grand when news of this car first emerged and thinking to myself, wow, that is a very short, good-looking sedan. The Flagship X and Flagship variants come with these rather tasteful-looking 17-inch wheels wrapped in Goodyear Assurance Triple Max tyres. Now, another thing to note is that you can only lock and unlock the door from the driver's side. Now, I'm not asking for it to be equipped on all 4 doors, but I like to get out, walk over to the front passenger to fish something out, and then after that lock the door and walk away without having to double back again. Sounds like I'm nitpicking, but come on, there are other cars that offer this function on both front doors. But if you ask me, the best angle of the whole S70 is the rear because of this full-width LED light bar. Now, for me, I think having it really completes the whole look, and of course there's also that light show that comes on every time you lock or unlock the car. What else? Now for me, as someone who is not so much into sporty looks on every single car you see on the road, it's actually quite refreshing to see that there are no visible exhaust tailpipes. I think it makes the car look a bit more matured and, again, refined. No powered tailgate whatsoever, but if you stand close enough to the boot with the key in your pocket, there is an auto-release feature. So if you have your hands full, just hang on a bit. There we go. Now, opening up the boot, we've got 500 litres of capacity, which is decent, but the wheel arch protrusions may get in the way if you have very large suitcases. On the flip side, there are 60/40 split folding seats, so that's good. Oh, you also get a space saver tyre. Stepping inside, the first thing you realize is how nicely bolstered the seats are. I mean, there's ample side support to keep you in place, but I just wish that there was a little bit more under thigh support, for me anyway. But all in all, it's a very comfortable interior to be in. Then you take a look around, have a feel, and you realize this trumps most if not all of its closest competitors. The overall architecture, it's just so much more cleaner, so much more modern, so much more minimalist. Plus points for the interior. Now I love the fact that we have physical buttons for the climate control. And while we don't have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, we do have a 12.3-inch touchscreen with the Atlas system, which is actually very pleasant to use because it's got a very high refresh rate, everything is very smooth, there's no perceptible lag whatsoever. Then, there's also Spotify installed from the get-go, so if music is your concern, that's sorted for you. Moving on, we've got power adjustment for the driver's seat, which is a feature, I must say, that's missing from most B-segment competitors. Another big plus point is storage space inside the cabin. So thanks to a shift-by-wire setup, beneath the shifter, we've got a huge platform, which is big enough for what I would say, a small pouch to sit in. Then above that, we've got the wireless charger, and there's even a tray for your smartphone, so that's quite smart indeed. Then we've got 2 cup holders of different heights, one a bit shallow, one a bit deeper. And then the center armrest opens up to a pretty deep storage space. Then moving on to the door cards themselves, this is huge. You can store several cards, maybe your house keys even. And right below that, there's more than enough space for a huge water bottle. And now on to the negatives. Sunroof operation, there are no physical buttons, so it's either via voice command or touchscreen, which is not exactly the most practical in my opinion. Then, one thing you should note is that the window switches are not lit, so if you enter a parking lot or it's dark outside and you need to wind down the windows, you might need some time to get used to where the buttons are. And while the 10.3-inch digital cluster is very nice to look at, graphics are excellent, and I also love the way how it can differentiate between cars and lorries and motorcycles, there's actually not much in the way of customization for a digital unit. Also, if you're new to the car, it might take you some time to get used to reading the rev counter, but this not having a manual gearbox, it's not a major deal breaker, just something to take note. Seated at the back, I am 184 centimeters tall, and with the front seat adjusted to my driving position, I have one tennis ball worth of legroom and a little over 1 tennis ball worth of headroom. And this is where I can truly appreciate the traditional 3-box sedan shape, because without a sloping roofline, you tend to get a bit more headroom. Now, as for storage spaces and features at the back, we've got rear aircon vents. We've got 2 USB ports, one Type-C, one Type-A, which is very smart, so if you've got different devices, it's not going to be a major problem. There's also a little cutout here, looks like a tray for you to slot your smartphone in. Seat pockets on both front seats. And the armrest folds down to reveal 2 cup holders. And over to the side, we've got the same huge door card as the door in front, which is more than enough to store keys, cards and whatnot. And below that, ample space for, again, more water bottles. In city driving, the S70 has its fair share of ups and downs. So let's begin with the positives, the ride. The ride is very good. It's comfortable, yet firm enough that you don't feel it wallowing about too much during corners. Uneven surfaces, potholes, bumpy roads, those get ironed out very nicely. It doesn't upset the car at all. And this being a Proton, I suppose ride and handling is their A game, so the S70 doing well in this regard is not that big of a surprise. Cruising at sub-highway speed, the ride is very settled, and you don't get that secondary bouncing sensation over undulating roads that can make your occupants a little bit car sick. So those are the plus points. Now, negatives, the drivetrain. There's a weird disconnect between putting your foot down and the car actually moving. So take for instance, I was at a roundabout the other day, and how we're used to knowing when to shoot out into a roundabout, right? The oncoming car was very far away, safely far away, and I put my foot down, nothing happens. And when I finally get moving, that oncoming car was a little bit too close for comfort. So if you're not used to it, junctions and roundabouts can get quite a bit dicey in this car. The other thing is, once you get moving, there is the matter of stopping. Not that there's no braking power, in fact there's a lot of braking power. It's just that there's a lot of it coming on at the top of the pedal, so modulating your brakes is a bit of a challenge as well. And if you're going to be stopping a lot in start-stop traffic in the city, it's going to feel like you're sometimes standing on the brake pedals a little bit too hard. What else? Depending on who you ask, it's either a good or a bad thing, but that shift-by-wire setup, yes, you get plenty of space beneath it. But if you're going to be doing a lot of 3-point turns in tight city streets, then that can be a bit frustrating because there's going to be a lot of double pushing and pulling on the gear lever to get to the gear you want, in and out, in and out. Don't fault Proton. It's not their fault. In fact, Volvo is also known for having this. And their argument is that it's a safety feature because you have to actually depress the brakes and then push the gear lever into the selected gear, into the gear you want, and it just makes sure that you're 100% focused on selecting the right gear so you don't accidentally select reverse when you should be going forward and then, pulling out of the building and falling and crashing your car. On the highway, once you're moving, things get a lot better. As mentioned, the ride's very settled, the car is very confident, and there's just the right amount of body roll to let you know where the limits are. Now, in terms of handling, so the car is very sorted, but the electric power steering it's quite vague. There's barely any feedback at all, so that's not exactly the best point about it. Now, another issue is the drive modes. So because there are no physical buttons to cycle between the modes, you gotta do it via the touchscreen, which is a terrible idea if you're on the move. In any case, knock it into sport mode and the steering gets heavier, the throttle response gets a bit sharper, but with that earlier mentioned disconnect, it's still a very off-putting sensation. Personally, what I would do is I would leave it in comfort mode, avoid sport and eco altogether, and just learn to adapt to the car. Refinement, it's decent but not the best because there's a fair amount of road noise coming into the cabin, which I suspect is down to the tires and the lack of sound insulation. On the flip side, there's very little vibrations and noise coming from the 3-cylinder engine itself. And speaking of the engine, so the 1.5 litre turbocharged port-injected mill makes about 150 horsepower and 226 Newton meters of torque compared to a 7-speed wet turbocharged gearbox. It's a good combination. I'm actually very glad they didn't go for the CVT natural aspirator setup seen in the M Grand. And power figures, yes, they're down on the Civic a bit. The Civic has 182 horsepower and 240-ish Newton meters, if I'm remembering correctly. But the truth is, it's not that much of a difference. You don't really feel it. In fact, you put your foot down and, before you know it, once the car really gets moving, you'll gain speed quite rapidly. Now, in terms of safety kit, you want to go for the Flagship and the Flagship X because those are the two variants with the full suite of ADAS. The bottom two don't exactly get everything. So what do we get? Let's see, we've got autonomous emergency braking with forward collision warning, we've got adaptive cruise control with stop-go, we've got lane centering assist, we've got lane departure warning and prevention, we've got traffic sign recognition, and we've got intelligent high beam control. Across the board, we've got 6 airbags, we've got rear collision warning, lane change assist, and rear cross traffic alert. Now, I understand as well if you can't quite stretch your budget to go for the top 2 specs and you still want to get the bottom 2 specs, that's fine. Just head on over to WapCar.my, compare all the variants side by side and see which one works best for you. So then, what about the Proton S70? Well, if I give or take 100,000 ringgit and I'm shopping around for a sedan, this is very, very high up the list. The City and the Vios, they may have the so-called prestige of a Japanese brand, but it's not the case on the inside. It's packed with features, looks very refined, and let's not even get into how well it drives over the competition. Yes, it has a few flaws, mainly the lack of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which can sour the experience, but if you can look past that, then I would say you're getting a lot of car for the money. Better yet, save yourself 5,000 ringgit and go for the flagship variant because number 1, the sunroof isn't all that. Number 2, you can get your own dash cam. Number 3, the quartz black paint, while it's decent, isn't as good looking as the teal Bayou green in my eyes. So, if you're looking for a sedan below the 100,000 ringgit mark, the Proton S70 Flagship could very well be your next perfect car. And on that note, thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Drive safe, everybody.